everyone, I'm RVRocks, and as of a week ago today, I have finally finished the most recent entry in the Resident Evil saga. Resident Evil 8, or Village, or 8-age. And I really liked it. The sense of dread and atmosphere provided by 8-age is unmatched. The character designs are all distinct and really interesting, not to mention remarkably unique by this series' standards. And of course, I'd be remiss to mention that the graphics are some of, if not the best, to come out in the last year. The game is phenomenal, but there was one lingering feeling in the back of my mind the entire time I was playing. While venturing from epic set piece to epic set piece, I couldn't shake this feeling. And I'm curious to see whether or not this is a hot take in the general gaming space, but as I was playing, I came to the conclusion that Resident Evil 8-age just feels confused with itself. Resident Evil isn't really a franchise that is known for being consistent across entries. 1, 2, 3, Code Veronica, 0, and 1's remake all fall under one gameplay style. Then 4, 5, 6, Revelations 1 and 2, as well as the remakes of 2 and 3, all fall under another. Then 7 and 8 both have their own distinct gameplay styles as well. Then you get into stuff like Reverse and Resistance and Gaiden and a handful of other spin-offs that just aren't very close to the original games at all. One could call this entire franchise confused, but the themes of survival horror, beautiful yet haunting atmosphere, and when the game allows it, fucking up zombies, stay consistent throughout each and every entry. I've enjoyed watching this franchise go from something that only a few really dedicatedly cared about back in the early 2010s to something that has stupid amounts of mainstream appeal. The reveal trailer for Biohazard had me going, Resident Evil, that's pretty neat. Meanwhile, the reveal trailer for Village had me losing my mind. This once classic franchise turned kinda dead franchise turned revived classic that has each game in the series becoming mainstream hits has had quite a journey these past few years. And I want to make it clear before diving into this that I am a fan of both this game and the series as a whole, but I can't help but think after having finished this most recent entry that 8-age was lacking. Minor spoilers for Resident Evil 8-age from this point on. You've been warned, proceed at your own risk. Resident Evil 8-age is basically split into three main categories that it more or less switches between on your first run through the game, and each of these genres has its own failings and successes. There's the combat sections of the game, there's the horror/atmospheric side of the experience, and there's the story stuff. Let's start out with the combat because this is probably the largest part of any of the gameplay. To sum up my problems in one sentence, Resident Evil 8-age is a survival horror title that feels like it's trying a little too hard to be a standard action game. Throughout the experience, you are given gun upon gun upon gun to slaughter your enemies with. But the thing with that is, you're never truly given a space to experiment with the weapons you have. I played through this game on the standard difficulty, whatever they consider the normal mode, and I found that there were still too many moments where the game would just leave you stranded with little to no ammo. I never quite ran out and was screwed, but I felt very much disincentivized to pick up newer weapons, especially since by the time they're given to you, you already have the first one basically fully upgraded. I never switched out my weapons from the first loadout I had because I'd already fully upgraded my initial versions of each gun. Base shotgun, base pistol, and the sniper rifle for me. Never, not once, did these provide to have too little firepower for any enemy that I encountered. And with the game allowing me to expand my inventory, with some quick rearranging, I was able to carry every single gun in the game on myself at all times, never once leaving behind anything. And even with only the base weapons, I only died to non-invincible enemies twice in my entire playthrough. Both times on the final boss of the game. And you could make the argument that maybe I'm just playing the game on too easy of a difficulty relative to my skill. But aside from all this, the game's combat sections feel almost at odds with the rest of the game too. Ethan Winters gets comically fucked up by every single enemy he encounters. Yeah, you can block most of these attacks, and it gets lampshaded within the game itself, but at the end of the day, Ethan being able to survive each of these leaves you with an aura of invincibility. Not to mention, each of these attack animations also take forever and slow down the speed of the game to a significant degree, made even worse by how this long, drawn-out animation is the default attack for most enemies. And by the end of the game, it makes the combat feel almost trivial. And all of this would be fine had it not been for the game focusing so hard on combat, especially towards the end. I won't talk full spoilers quite yet, but Heisenberg's whole area is focused around the combat mechanics, and these problems only get amplified here. So close to the final boss, I felt myself wanting to just run around as many combat encounters as I could, because at a point, it just felt like it was padding out my adventure. Also, there's a moment at the end of the game where you're expected to mow down these zombies like nothing else, and I imagine it was supposed to be some catharsis after a game of hiding in fear, but Most of the zombies didn't really pose a threat to me past the initial village area anyways, so that particular side of this moment didn't really do anything for me. However, all this kinda changes after the first playthrough. Anyone who's ever played a Resident Evil game will know that this game series is one that is meant to be played multiple times in new ways, and with that, my perspective on this issue kinda went out the window. New Game Plus and Mercenaries mode both allowed me that freedom of experimentation with different weaponry that I felt was sorely lacking in the main campaign. So I pose a question to you, my fine audience: how big of an issue is this really? It's an issue that gets remedied later on in the lifetime of the game, but I think it's a safe assumption to say that most people will probably only play this game once and move on, so for most, this problem will be present for their entire time with the game. I don't really have a definitive answer for this one, so please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Outside of that whole mess though, there's also issues with the delivery of the more spooky content. I touched on this a little earlier, but it rarely feels like there's any present danger after a certain point. For a good example of this, let's go to the internet's favorite character from this game, Lady Dimitra. She is built up as a very large threat through her entire section of the game. Treading through the halls of Castle Dimitra, I was terrified of bumping into her. The game does a truly excellent job with environmental storytelling and atmosphere. This Victorian castle with all the little sections filled with ever-present hints about what would happen to you if you got caught by the giant lady and her daughters, I was legitimately scared. But the game quickly loses all of that tension. I'm sure most of you have seen this clip, like, whoa, haha, so funny, look at her ass. But this kind of exemplifies my biggest problem with the tension this game tries to build. So many enemies in this game can just be evaded with a quick juke move. Lady Dimitrescu, the bigger, harder enemies that the game clearly wants you to have some kind of climactic boss fight with, and even just the standard enemies can get pretty easily walked around and exploited by the level geometry to make things easier. Now you can make the argument that by running around enemy encounters, I am cheating myself out of the experience and making myself less satisfied overall, but I shall retort with, why can I do this? Was there no Scaredy Cat developer or playtester who realized that so many enemies in this game can just be ran around? In Lady Dimitrescu's castle, there's this one point where you're literally expected to just run around her. Like, this is the first time I realized I could do anything but run and hide and hope for the best. And since this is a scripted sequence with no getting around, I imagine many other players like me realized that they could do this on every enemy. And for her, it's especially egregious. She's not a mindless drone. She is the most intimidating and largest threat you've met so far. And now, instead of you being a lone man sneaking around this abominable force, you get these moments where it just feels like you're reenacting Tom and Jerry. In other games with similar AI and methods of escape, you don't really have a fighting chance of surviving. If you get caught, that's it. But then here comes Ethan Winters, taking every possible injury with no recourse, fucking up every single zombie in sight, and now being able to juke out of the way of enemies feels especially disappointing. Past the first area, I'm never led to believe that Ethan can't just take down whatever enemy he needs to. The game at first kinda makes you believe that Ethan's only able to take out Dimitrescu with the use of some demon-killing knife, but then he manages to take out all the other enemies without that. This creates a large disconnect between the Ethan that we see in the cutscenes and the Ethan that we play as. At one point in the game, you're forced to partake in a more escape room style scenario, House Beneviento, which is much more what you would expect from your traditional horror game experience. They take away your weapons, give you puzzles, make you hide from creepy monsters, the whole 9 yards, and this is probably my favorite area in the entire game. The more traditional horror stuff hasn't been Resident Evil's primary objective in a really long time, but boy does this game wear it well. However, they cap off this area with a boss fight that is more of a hide-and-seek style fight than a traditional one, and that really disappointed me. In-universe, it's revealed that the character running this area has some kind of mind control ability, yet I feel like that's never truly utilized to its fullest potential. We could have gone full Faith Seed, or Scarecrow Fear Toxin, or Psycho Mantis, but in terms of reality breaking, we just get a really creepy house. In a series that already has tons and tons of gross, horrifying monsters with unique supernatural abilities, having a character that can manipulate your reality only to give you an overall tame haunted house experience was pretty disappointing. I think it would have been neat if you actually fought Beneviento as a traditional boss. Maybe make her huge and have her reach inside the house akin to Mom from Binding of Isaac. This area is such a cool departure from the rest of the game, but I feel like it comes a little bit too early in your experience to feel truly impacted when your whole status quo gets shifted for a little while. I feel like if they switched around House Moreau and House Beneviento, it would be an overall more satisfying experience. Given that both Moreau and Dimitrescu are your typical Resident Evil style areas with puzzles, the occasional fight, and constantly having to work around an omnipresent threat, House Beneviento would have served as a more effective departure if it was later in the game. So it's a first-person shooter with gunplay that doesn't really allow you to experiment, and a horror game that fails to really deliver tension due to the AI being shoddy and Ethan being an invincible warrior. After all this complaining, you might be wondering, what's my beef with the story? Well, in comparison to the last 2 issues, it's pretty minuscule, but here are my free-flowing, very much spoiler-filled thoughts. Resident Evil has never been a franchise particularly known for having the world's best plots or writing. Looking back at the older games provides you comically bad dialogue and delivery. And while that's charming in its own sense, 8-Age begins to toe a line of writing that isn't bad enough to be funny, but isn't good enough to hold up once you think about it a little bit more. Chris Redfield not telling Ethan about the plan just feels like a setup for this scene in the trailer, despite them having been on the same side the whole time. The storybook opening and closing for this game was wonderfully animated, but wholly unnecessary, just serving as a preview to the 4 House Lords and Mother Miranda. And most of the twists that happened throughout the story were predicted by me and my sister in our play sessions. Like, oh yeah, Mia's not actually dead, right? Lady Dimitrescu is totally gonna have some gross, hideous form. I bet that the lady in black is the one really in control of the puppet. I bet Ethan has some mold in him because he's surviving everything. I don't really think it's bad writing, but it felt predictable and, well, formulaic. In fact, my favorite area in the game was Moreau's Reservoir, because he was the least predictable of the 4 main bad guys. But his area is way shorter than the others. I feel like the game is built upon the backs of giving us these really cool moments rather than one central through line that makes sense from beginning to end. Which is a shame because these cool moments are pretty fucking cool. But they begin to lack significance with all the issues I've mentioned compounding in on themselves. So, in conclusion, I liked this game. I'd wager to say that I liked it a lot. But regardless of what was happening, something always felt off. Something always felt like it was wrong. Every area had these places where it worked amazingly and places where it didn't. Every plot thread had moments where it all jived and moments where I couldn't relate to the protagonist's wishes. And while I'll still say that I enjoyed the experience, and it's probably going to go down as one of my favorite games that I played this year, it is clear to me now, more than ever, that Resident Evil 8-Age is confused. And if you're confused about what else I do here, then why don't you subscribe to RVRocks and ring the bell? Like this video and comment with your thoughts on Resident Evil 8-Age. I get the feeling that this video is going to be unpopular, because it was such a big release, and even though I made an effort to praise the game where I could, there's still going to be a large amount of people mad that I am criticizing a game in a series as big as this. Either way, hope you folks enjoyed, and make sure to send any especially targeted hate or love to my Twitter at RVRocks. But before you do any of that, I have been RVRocks, and thank you so much for watching. See ya!